like, is there an equivalent of the thinking fast and slow in machines? I mean, in all honesty, the answer is yes, actually, there is. We have the reasoning large language models, right? The chain of thought and methods like that are slower. They are kind of like the system two thinking, where the language model is thinking about something, then it's laying out a plan. You even see like the thinking come up when the language model is producing its output. That's kind of a neat trick in some sense, but it's not far off the mark. Um, and then there is the system one, right, which where you don't prompt the model to think, you just ask it, well, what's the answer, right, and just give me the first answer that comes to your mind, and that's usually the default setting. And that was all that was possible for the earlier language models. But starting from GPT 4.0 and some of the, and especially you see these with OpenAI's O3 model, O1 models, right? These are the O series of models are slower. They are capable of more system two like thinking. On the one hand, we can argue that it's all mechanical and they are not genuinely doing system two thinking. On the other hand, there are very real reasons to believe that the machines are also capable of system one and two thinking.
At this point, then, what is the difference, as far as you're concerned, as someone working in the industry, between human thought and machine thought?
So when you first posed that question to me, it was a very thought-provoking question, no pun intended. And the reason was that I got hung up on the word thought. That's where the interesting similarity and difference arises. That's the word that we have to pick apart. Whether philosophically or mechanically or whatever way. And let me try to explain why I think that word is kind of the word on which this conversation needs to be had in some sense. What do we mean by the word thought, right? So,
and forgive me, why thought as opposed to sentience, or as opposed to self-consciousness, or as opposed,
I think they all mean different things, right? So the
Right, of course.
conversation would change depending on which word you're using. There is an issue of semantics here, right? That at some point does it just become, a quibble about semantics, right? And I think no one probably wants to go down that route. But the reason why I think the word thought is probably closer to, I mean, I'm not denying that it's thinking. I think it's okay to say that it's thinking, although there may be some controversy over the use of that word even. But the reason why I fixate on that word is because here's the strawman argument, right? So one could very well say a biologist, right, could just say that, look, clearly they're different, right? One of them is based in neural substrates and axons and dendrites and neurons, and it's all biology, right? It's dictated by genes and proteins, and the mechanics, right? At a purely biological level, the mechanics are very different. There's no denying that, right? Like that is purely uncontroversial. But at a cognitive level, right, if we may use that term both for humans and machines, are they the same or are they not the same? And I think over there, right, that's why the interesting distinction or non-distinction starts to arise. That once we get over the biological aspect, that yes, humans and machines are different. There's no biology in the machine. From a purely cognitive slash algorithmic standpoint, right? Are we kind of running the same programs in our heads, more or less, right? Maybe minor differences aside. And if not, then why not? And where are those differences arising? That's a question that is harder to pin down because, again, there are arguments both for and against even that claim.
Like perhaps can cognition be multiply realizable? In other words, does it have to depend upon the particular wet stuff in our nervous systems?
In some cases, it does because, again, the strawman would be like embodied cognition, right? Which
Right.
we don't yet have in machines. So we know that there are the senses, right, do influence the way that you think, right? Like if you're, like if you touch something or you're moving, or like even there have been experiments also where, like, if you smile, right, just mechanically smile, right, you will actually start to feel happier. That at least the mental states, right, are certainly affected by the physical states, and
Well,
even mental states is kind of abstract, right? It may
yeah.
all like boil down to the firing of the neurons and the hormones and all of that. Certainly for abstract thinking, right? And for certain very simple kinds of thinking, like adding numbers, I think one could argue that the algorithms running in our head and in the machine's head are very similar when, like, for adding two numbers or five numbers. But even going beyond that, for like language, right? Like just general abstract or even creative language, there is some argument to be made that the machine might be very similar to the human because it has really learned from a lot of human data, right? And the language models that the machines have learned are human language models. They are coming from natural language. They are not perfect, it will get better, but that's the argument that okay, the algorithms are similar in our head and their head because it's coming there's the data that we have created has gone to train them. And so as long as we get over this thing that mechanically we are different as biology and machine and hardware, right, the algorithm still might be the same. Now there's also an argument against it, right, which is that look, we don't really learn, right, by reading the whole web. And we and evolution has also given us certain abilities that it's not so clear that we have managed to reverse engineer those in the machine. So we are now in an era where even for these seemingly simple questions, there's a for and against that can be made.
So, but let me ask you though. I mean, from what I understand, AI still has some problems with advanced mathematics. Like, even though there's been a lot of great strides in language models, math models are still a little. I mean, you tell me.
Well, it's a topic of research. I think there is a DARPA program that just launched very recently. They are accepting solicitations right now. We thought about at USC we thought about going for it, but at least in my group we decided not to. But I'm only saying this to make the case that it's coming. It's going to be investigated for the next 3 or 4 years. And even before DARPA investigates it, DeepMind and as well as some others, but especially DeepMind, Google DeepMind, has done some work on coming up with new mathematics using the large language model. It's still very simple, but it has designed new algorithms, for example, that were previously undiscovered. When I say algorithm, I mean something very general. I don't just mean a computer program. I mean, like, for example, matrix multiplication. A better way of doing that is very much an area of mathematics, right? It's an applied math problem. Um, there have also been programs recently where the AI was asked to do sophisticated problems. To a certain extent, it succeeded, but it's not. There is some evidence that it will succeed on the undergrad level problems or the high school level problems. Still makes mistakes, but it's getting much better. But now we are talking about moving to graduate level problems, like pure math problems. That number theorists and professors in mathematics actually try to solve. And there's a concerted effort right now involving pure mathematicians, some very famous, who are trying to use AI to accelerate um, pure mathematics. So this is really what graduate students and professors do, and where the Fields Prize, and which is like the Nobel Prize in math, right? And like all these prizes are won. And so AI is now being applied to that. I think we can't underestimate the possibility that it will happen because when ChatGPT first came out, I distinctly remember this was late 22, where obviously it was the first version. It was nothing compared to what it is even now, right? It could not generate code, it could not do images. Even the generation was not that great. It could not do simple math. And at the time, I heard some arguments from quite a number of people who were like, well, I should not be scared. This like can't do what I can do. I'm like, listen, this is the first version, right? Like, if this is the first version, don't dismiss it because there's going to be a second version and a third version and a fourth version. And then maybe you should start looking at that and like not evaluate what the current version can do, but how fast it's proceeding, right? That's the metric here. Not what it can currently do, but how fast it is improving, every month, every 4 or 5 months, every 6 months. So, now I think that, even the naysayers, right, who are like, no, this can't really do anything that intelligent humans can do. It's all very mechanical still. It's just, statistical, stochastic parrots and so on. Well, we're starting to see some very real, economics sort of in fruition where we're seeing the job losses. We are seeing company CEOs, say that 95% of my code will be written using AI, and it is being written using AI. We're seeing entire teams being gutted. So It's,
Imagine,
I think the mathematics is also going to, whether it can actually do like very Fields Prize winning math, right, or Nobel Prize winning science, obviously is speculative, and some might argue no. But the basic math and graduate level math, undergrad level math is very much on the cusp of being beaten.
Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
imagine being an educator and a lifetime of grading papers and what that looks like now with all this GPT and AI stuff. All the sort of the standard distinction between weak AI and strong AI, between narrow AI and general AI. Do these categories have any meaning for you, or are we just?
Yes. So weak and strong don't. I think those are not used often
Yeah.
anymore. I haven't seen them being
And why
recently
is
used.
that?
I think maybe the reason is that because I think it's because the narrow, general, and super categorization has just for whatever reason become the dominant way of talking about this. So ANI is narrow intelligence, AGI is general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and ASI, which also is increasingly being talked about,
Which is?
is artificial super
Yeah,
intelligence,
okay.
right? So a number of people have now brought up super intelligence as not something speculative any longer, right? Now, I remember when I was doing my PhD, right, and I graduated in 2016 with my PhD. I mean, AGI was still considered very science fiction, like very out there, right? Like no serious researcher would even talk about AGI. It was very sci-fi, and the term ANI was not in common use because everything was ANI, right? But then, like 2023, 2024, right? DeepMind and some others, and also OpenAI has its mission for AGI, right? But 23 and 24 is when AGI started emerging, right, as a serious term. Now it's taken very seriously. But now ASI is actually a very common topic of conversation, and in AI safety, I just put out a Substack today, actually, on my Substack, on the Singapore consensus, which is this meeting that just took place. Joshua Bengio, who invented one of the three inventors of deep neural networks, on which so much of this is based. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics, I believe, along with Jeff Hinton. But Bengio, right, who is one of the pioneers of deep learning, is the leading author on the Singapore consensus, and they actively talk about AI safety in that report. It's very readable, but in that, they actually have a Venn diagram showing ANI, AGI, ASI, and so it's not speculative or laughable or any of that anymore. Like I think the narrow is pretty much out the door. It's a dinosaur at this point. The AGI we are very close to. We are between ANI and AGI. It's a liminal boundary, but we are approaching AGI. No one doubts that we will get to AGI. Whether it's 2 years or 5 years remains to be seen. It will not be 10 years or 50 years anymore. It's between 2 to 5 years, and most people believe AGI will come during that time. We are close already. And ASI, right, that is more speculative, but given the pace at which it's moving, again, not a laughable, speculative possibility. I mean, there are people really raising the alarm now that look, we're seeing the job losses, we are seeing entire fields getting automated, we're seeing a lot of cost cutting. So, like, how much more proof do we need to have before we start having some kind of very serious conversation on where all these workers will go? How will they get hired? Who's gonna, pay for basic services, right? I mean, and so it's. I think that conversation is coming, very soon, and it will cause a lot of controversy and political polarization because some people will equate UBI and all these controls, right, with socialism, etc., right, which have always had a bit of a scary flavor. But in the end, a society cannot survive if 40%, 30% of people get unemployed or cannot do anything. So it's a very interesting time. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that the conversation needs to be had.
And why exactly has the weak strong distinction become passé?
So I think the reason is like even if you consider ANI, right, like the era of ANI, I mean, is it a weak or a strong AI, right? It doesn't
Right.
make sense because when you have like face recognition, right, the it was near perfect already, right, even before well before ChatGPT. So like face recognition on our phones, etc. They're all using AI, and that the deep learning, right, had achieved that. Like I would say by 2015, it was very good, and then it only got better. So the face recognition, is it weak? Is it strong? Right? I would argue it's strong, but it's a strong ANI, right? Now, at the same time, you also have certain AGI problems where even the latest large language model is not doing very well. But this is like the I think humanity's last mile or humanity's last stand. It has a very evocative name, the test set, but it's kind of like it's almost like the Voyager that was sent into space. Like it contains like we believe that once the AI can solve that data set, it will kind of have crossed AGI and it will be on its way to ASI. So you might argue, well, humanity's last stand right over there, the AGI is weak, but so would any human, right? Like I think that if I had to solve humanity's last stand, I'm not sure how well I would do it. Um, like so, it's I think that what do you mean by weak and strong?
Well,
Depends on the task, and
can
that's
you
one reason why it doesn't make
can
sense.
you review for us, what exactly weak and strong once meant? Like
Well,
what
I
was
don't
it?
even care honestly at this point
Yeah.
because it's irrelevant.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. It's at
No, but
this
even
point.
for
No,
your
at this
viewers,
point.
yeah.
At this point,
Yeah.
we have so surpassed. And I mean, anyone playing with Chat GPT-4 who still walks away with the question of weak and strong AI, I think is just deluded.
Yes,
It's just
question of
irrelevant.
semantics. I completely
Okay.
agree with you. I think that there's no point even debating it, and that's why people
Yeah.
abandon those terms, right? Because it was like it doesn't make sense anymore to talk about that. We have three very specific categories now, which is ANI, AGI, ASI. ANI has also fallen by the wayside, right? It still makes sense to talk about it, but only in a historical context or in very specific applications,
Gotcha.
right? Like, for example, I might say that, look, I don't want I want a very specific module to do face recognition for me, and I want it on my phone, and I don't want ChatGPT to do it. Well, that's an ANI, fine, right? But if we had ChatGPT, would it be able to do it with some language model? Be able to do it? Sure, right? So it's in some sense ANI is more like okay, we can still talk about it, but
Yeah.
it's superseded. And then you have AGI, which is the more controversial term because we are not there yet, but we are certainly approaching it, right? So we're in this intermediate kind of the sort of tongue the matrix, right? We have the limbo, right? The train. So it's kind of like we're on the train, right? And the train um, keeps coming back to the same station, but it's going to move to the next station very soon, and it will be. I suspect it will not be like linear. It will be like a step function, right? So I think when Sam Altman is ready, he's going to come out with GPT-5 at some point, and I think that he really wants GPT-5 to be much closer to AGI, which is why they are working on 5, and many people believe it's coming either late this year or early the next year. It probably won't be AGI just yet, but much closer to AGI. And that's why they're not calling, they are updating the GPT 4.0, very often. It's very different even from like 3 months ago. But they're still calling it GPT 4.0. They're not changing the name to 5 because I do believe very strongly, and I think there may even be like a blog post or something backing this up, that 5 like they are changing the numbers so that they want the numbers to mean something. And 5 is going to be like a mile ahead of 4. And that's really what OpenAI wants, I think. Whether they will succeed or not, or just for marketing reasons, right? Maybe they'll have to release 5, whether it's a whole lot better than 4 or not. I mean, those are like real world economic concerns. But I think in an ideal world, they want to put out 5 and claim that, look, we have achieved yet another milestone. And now we're much closer to AGI.
Here's the question: when can we know if an AI has developed real self-reflective sentience? Alan Turing says when we can't tell the difference between a computer or a human being when we speak, like putting one in one room, another one. So John's
Yeah, that's been solved,
right.
right?
Well,
I mean, he had at the time thought about that, right?
Right,
And the
so-
truth is that now we feel that's inadequate,
Yeah.
at least to a certain extent.
Right. So John Searle,
Right?
gotcha. So John Searle
Yeah.
comes along and says, really, no. Just because something can imitate that doesn't necessarily mean it has sentience. Think of a man in a big room. There's a man who walks up to the room from outside who knows Chinese and writes "Ni hao ma" on a piece of paper, slides under the door, and in the room is a big box of sort of Chinese letters and a rule book which says.
I know what the problem is. I think what I'm trying to say is that if you go and look in the encyclopedic entry, right, the Stanford Encyclopedia of
Yeah.
Philosophy, which very accurately captures all the different discussions, even on the Searle's Chinese room problem. there are very great philosophers who fall on both sides of the debate.
Yeah.
So there are some who say that no, actually the machine in the room, right, if it's giving you answers that make sense to your Chinese question and it's giving you answers in Chinese, and your axiom, your assumption is that it's able to do that for any Chinese question that you give to it. It's going to give you an answer that will seem like it's coming from a person who knows Chinese. There are great philosophers who have said that no, actually, it does know Chinese in the sense that we understand the
Right.
word know or understand, right? That the machine understands Chinese, it knows Chinese. There have been others who have said no, it doesn't.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say is that with so many difficult philosophy problems, I think that you will not be able to do it's not like a scientific problem. There's a reason why there's a big difference between science, math, and philosophy, right? Scientific hypotheses, right, they have to be falsifiable. If a hypothesis is not falsifiable, it would not be considered scientific by the definition of the scientific method, right? So that's what we've agreed on as within the scientific community. Something has to be falsifiable. And you might, have a theory in place that could make it falsifiable or not. So in your case, right, if you assume as an axiom, right, if you say that, okay, if there is no difference at all, so your axiom might be, right, here's where you rigorously think about it. So your axiom might be that if I cannot tell the difference between something that is acting conscious and some putative entity like a human being that I know is conscious on first principles, right? You can't prove I'm conscious, by the way. That is first principles. You are making the assumption Mayank is conscious, Mayank is a human being, Mayank is conscious. That's an axiom, by the way. There's no actual written down proof. You can think of it as definitional or axiomatic. That's the correct way to think about it. So let's say I am conscious. Now there is another machine, and you might have an axiom that says, now the axiom is debatable, right? This is always the case with all axioms, including mathematical axioms like set theory. But we might say, okay, we are going to agree on an axiom, and again, agree is the key word, right? Some people might disagree, but you and I might say that, okay, we both agree on the axiom that if there is a machine who is acting like Mayank or some human being or a general human being, however we might define it, and there is no difference, we can't make out the difference, right? So the Turing test, right, in any number of, in any way, shape, or form, then that entity is conscious. Now that's an axiom, right? So now in this context, if you take that axiom as a given, then your second question makes sense and we can answer it. And so we have the test now, right? So if there's a machine that satisfies, X, Y, or Z test, or is indistinguishable, in certain characteristics that it's exhibiting from an ordinary human being, then we could say, well, on the basis of my axioms, I can say it's sentient. But the axiom is always open to attack, right? So someone might come and say, well, your axiom is not something that I agree with. So your proof that this entity is sentient or not sentient is not whole because I don't believe in the axiom. My axiom is that you have to have a biological substrate, otherwise you don't have consciousness. And some consciousness philosophers do have that axiom. If we take that axiom, then it doesn't matter what the machine does, right? The machine will never be conscious in the eyes of those philosophers because they are saying my axiom is you have to have a biological substrate and then you need some other things. But if you don't have the biology, if you're not made up of, if you're not a carbon-based life form and you don't have a brain of this structure and you can make it as specific as you want, then I will not obey your proof or I won't believe your proof. I will not be convinced by your proof that this entity is conscious.
So that seems to be the lesson that I'm from this whole
So
talk.
the language and the axioms, right? Not just the language, but even the axioms need to be gotten straight. And so it might make sense to say that, okay, there is actually precedent for this, right? So let me maybe say something about the precedent. So in logic, right, like pure logic, mathematical logic, there are some things which you can say, for example, in first order logic or in propositional logic, but you cannot make that same claim in second order logic. If you remove certain axioms, then certain proofs are not possible anymore. Certain properties of the system cannot be proved anymore. So what Gödel proved, right, Gödel, was that in a sufficiently powerful axiomatic system like arithmetic, right, which is sufficiently powerful, a lot of math is based on that, including number theory, it cannot be both complete and consistent at the same time, right? What Turing showed, right, is that there are algorithms which are undecidable. Now we don't need to exactly go into what these terms mean. They do have a very precise technical meaning within those axiomatic systems. My point here is that once you have an axiomatic system, right, so then you can start to make certain proofs. So it's not about even just the terminology. I think the terminology plus axioms will allow you to make progress philosophically on the question of when or how or if the AI can become sentient and how you would know what the test would be.
So,
Right. So until then, it's kind of like, okay, I think it's this, therefore it's this. I think it should have intentionality, and I am defining intentionality in that way. But then you're kind of living in your own world in some sense, right? You have to be able to look at different axiomatic systems and convince people which one is the right one.
so right now, between you guys, right, between a philosopher and a scientist or computer science, between you guys, like, if I say the words consciousness, intentionality, sentience, thinking, am I saying 4 different things? Am I saying 8 different things because each of you guys understand them differently? Or am I saying 50,000 different things? Let's step back and let you first step and then mine.
It's interesting. I mean,
Sean,
what I'm getting from this whole talk is the basic conversation we have to have in order to have this conversation, which is exactly,
Yeah.
Mayank, is what you're talking about. To parse out exactly. I remember early on in this conversation, I asked about thinking in relation to consciousness or sentience, and you made clear they're not the same thing. It's interesting. What I've taken away from this conversation is how basic we have to begin in order even to entertain these questions.
And basics are hard, by the way, right? I think we should not dismiss that. The basics are easy, because the basics are very hard, right? I mean, if you
Extremely
think about
hard.
even something like math,
Yeah.
right? Like it really took someone like Bertrand Russell, right? And which really happened, like I would say, like 1900, after 1900, that he wrote the Principia Mathematica.
Yeah, with Whitehead.
Right? And so even in something like math, which is a world of our invention, right? I mean, certainly the way we reason using math, right, tells us a lot about the physical world also. I'm not saying that it cannot guide our thinking about the physical world, but math is a great human invention.
If breaking math for AI happens, will we actually have consciousness there that we're going to have to give rights to? And like, for example, if the AI says, I don't want to work in your call center, you can go blow me, are we going to have to actually deal with that?
And will it be able to blow you?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the fact is that I have a million sci-fi stories where they actually, I mean, let's face it. I mean, like, I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. The AI goes insane because it has consciousness without sentience.
Right.
So it decides to kill the whole species. Anyhow, we'll come back to this in a minute.